Hey guys, and welcome back to Hoosier Hardware, and today we're checking out the GTX 1650 and the Ryzen 3 3100, basically to see if this is a budget match made in heaven, or is this a pairing that you would probably be better off avoiding. So right off the bat, we can't really talk about budget without talking a little bit about pricing. So starting with the CPU, right now I'm seeing these things for about $120, $130 for a Ryzen 3 3100. It doesn't seem like this is a CPU that's quite available at MSRP, which is just shy of $100, like $99 or $99.99, something like that. The MSRP should be basically right at $100. This CPU is basically not available anywhere near that right now. If you're going to be spending $120, $130 at that point, I would recommend you just save up an extra $20, $30, $40 and get a Ryzen 5 3600. But if you do find one of these Ryzen 3 3100s at the MSRP of about $100, then it's actually a really nice gaming chip, and you can check out the links down below to see current availability and pricing. This thing's kind of sort of come in and out of stock quite a bit, so pricing and availability down below. Now the GTX 1650 has not been hard to find, but right now it's priced at about $150, and again, at $150, this is not actually that great of a deal. In fact, I would recommend just going with the used market at that point, because you can find better deals either on these, whether you're going with like the EVGA B-Stock website, or you can just buy a different card used and get better performance. But if you are wanting a GTX 1650 and you are wanting to buy it brand new, about $150 looks like what you're going to pay right now. But again, it's hard to say where this market with a GTX 1650 is going to go from here, whether the price will go down or whether it'll jump back up, because availability and pricing is really all over the map due to a lot of factors right now in 2020. But regardless, today's video is about pairing these two somewhat budget options together to get a good gaming experience, or at least to see if we get a good gaming experience. Now, the advantage of a Ryzen 3 3100, at least as far as I can see, is that this is a CPU that's going to be good for gaming for several years yet to come. Now, to be fair, 4 cores and 8 threads in 2020 isn't exactly big news, but it should be competent at least at 1080p gaming on, high settings for some games, medium settings for others, and depending on the CPU usage of a game, it may even be low settings down the road, but it should be good to go to get you at least up and running. And the $100 that you're going to pay for one, if you find it at MSRP, is actually a really good value. Now, my view on the 1650 is less optimistic for the future. Right now, I think this thing is probably going to be able to play modern AAA titles, but I don't think it's going to have an overly long lifespan in that regard. I would view a purchase of a 1650 kind of as your starter GPU, but you should build your PC around the mindset that you're going to need to upgrade this thing in the not great distant future, at least if you're planning on playing modern AAA titles. If you're just into esports, then yeah, this thing should actually be pretty good for that. So I'm going to run this combination through the standard benchmarks I've been using for a little while now. It is important to note I'm running 16 gigabytes of DDR4 memory running at 3200 megahertz. And right now, even if you're building a budget rig, I highly recommend you get that full 16 gigabytes now, because RAM is really, really cheap right now, and it's just a fantastic value to just go ahead and get the 16 gigabytes. Of course, you could settle for 8 gigabytes if you need to save just a little bit of money. And by the way, if you're looking for different benchmarks than the games that I use in this video, let me know your thoughts down below about other games that are recent titles, like 2019, 2020 titles that would push GPUs and CPUs, and just generally games that you would like to see benchmarked in future videos, maybe with different hardware configurations. Just let me know your thoughts on that down below. But with no further ado, let's hop into those benchmarks. So we're leading off today with Fall Guys, and this game is capped by the developer at 60 FPS. That is, you can't run the game, or at least right now, you can't run the game above 60 FPS. And the only reason I'm running Fall Guys at all in this benchmarking is just to make sure the GTX 1650 can in fact handle this game. And as you see, with the average FPS of 59, 1% low at 52, and 0.1% low at 50, this game is absolutely no problem. On the low preset at 1080p, we see a very nice experience with the combination of the Ryzen 3100 overclocked to 4.3 gigahertz, the 1650, and the 16 gigabytes of DDR4 memory running at 3200 megahertz. Everything just works really well here. It's a buttery smooth experience. The average FPS was over 200 there at 206, 1% low at 140. 42 and 0.1% low at 61. And anecdotally speaking here, just like a lot of hardware configurations with Fortnite, the sort of stuttery bit was at the very beginning when you first land. After that, it smoothed out even more. Not that it was overly stuttery to begin with, but that lower 0.1% low number likely came from the first handful of seconds in the game world itself. Once that got ironed out, everything was buttery smooth. This was an excellent experience. And now we move into some AAA titles that are a little bit more difficult to run. And Metro Exodus, at least the benchmark here, was sort of that way where while the average FPS is well within that playable range at 47, there were dips into the 20s. The 1% low is 24 and the 0.1% low there at 22. And in this case, those lower numbers do not actually indicate stuttering. They actually just indicate low frame times, or rather high frame times. We'll just call it bad frame times in general with this title, where the FPS was dipping down into the mid and lower 20s. So what I would recommend here is dropping that normal preset down to the low preset, or just strategically changing some of the settings to gain some frames back, because in demanding areas, this title will absolutely run under 30 FPS with this hardware configuration. Jumping over to Borderlands 3, at least in the built-in benchmark, we had a very nice experience here with an average FPS of 63, a 1% low of 51, and a 0.1% low of 44. And this was a pretty smooth experience, whereas in the past I've seen some issues with this title, and lower core and thread count CPUs, including 4-core and 8-threaded CPUs, have had some struggles with this title before. But in this case, the Ryzen 3100 handled it just fine, and the GTX 1650 actually gives us pretty solid frame rates here, considering we're on the medium preset. And if you really do want to get more frames out of this game, you definitely have some places where you could lower some settings and get a few more frames out of it at 1080p. And finally, in the Red Dead Redemption 2 benchmark on medium settings, this would be not a playable experience, although it wasn't a horribly stuttery mess. Again, what we're seeing here is basically just lower frames per second in general. So what I would recommend here is lowering some settings down, drop settings down to low settings on 1080p, and you can probably get that average FPS into the mid or even upper 30s to the point where this game is absolutely playable pretty much across the board. Whereas in this built-in benchmark, it definitely looked playable at parts, but at other parts it just wasn't running at a high frame rate. So definitely drop settings down just a little bit further, and this could be a playable game with this hardware configuration. So I suppose it is conclusion time, and it's basically what I expected. The Ryzen 3 3100 is a good gaming chip, and in 2020 you can still definitely get away with 4 cores and 8 threads. This thing was doing its job quite well and would at least give you a little bit of longevity. Now, just like I expected though, the 1650 is going to need to be replaced at some point if you really want a top-notch gaming experience. It's not that it's a bad card. It may be a little bit of a bad value at $150 right now. There are better values both above it in price brackets as well as below it. But if you're looking at a 1650 as a starter card, you could do worse. It's not that it's a bad card, like I said, it's just not a great value. So if you have one of these laying around, maybe you already purchased one, then you don't really need to ditch it anytime in the immediate future, but you are probably gonna wanna look forward to the future, maybe when new graphics cards launch here in a little bit, and you can start to plan out what your upgrade path is gonna look like, because while this thing is gonna stay competent in esports games and easier to run games for the foreseeable future, if you're looking at the most demanding games out there, maybe Cyberpunk 2077 for example, you may want to upgrade this in the not great distant future. So if you're looking at this as a card or already have it, then maybe you also plan out what that upgrade path looks like moving forward. But those are my thoughts on this configuration. Let me know in the comment down below what you think about a Ryzen 3 3100 paired with a 1650. What GPU would you pair the 3100 with instead of a 1650? Just let me know all your thoughts down below. And of course, if you like this video, give it a like, share, subscribe, and comment. All those things are very helpful for the channel. You can follow me both on Instagram and on Twitter at Hoosier Hardware. And as always, I'll let YouTube queue up a couple more videos from my channel for you to watch. I'm Shane with Hoosier Hardware, and I'll see you guys in the next video.